Welcome to Lesson 1 in this series, covering American government and politics, which has been created to support the teaching of A-Level politics. This lesson examines the principles of the United States Constitution. In this lesson, you will consider: what are the main principles that informed the drafting of the Constitution? How well do these principles work in practice? And how relevant today are the principles that originally informed the drafting of the Constitution? The first principle of the Constitution we will consider is popular sovereignty. The United States emerged from the American War of Independence, a conflict that the Founding Fathers identified as a revolution against the tyrannical rule of a monarch. The Founding Fathers feared tyranny affecting the future government of the United States. By this, they meant cruel or oppressive government. Popular sovereignty means the government power derives from the will of the people, the consent of the governed, to use the words of the Declaration of Independence. The most obvious example of popular sovereignty in the Constitution is the requirement for regular federal elections, which ensure a transfer of power based on popular will. Article 2 of the Constitution requires regular congressional elections every 2 years for members of the House of Representatives and every 6 years for members of the Senate. Article 3 of the Constitution requires regular presidential elections every 4 years. Does popular sovereignty work in practice? For most of American history, there has been an orderly and unchallenged transfer of power based on the results of elections. However, President Trump openly challenged the result of the 2020 presidential election and was later impeached for incitement of insurrection. Furthermore, controversy surrounding the 2020 presidential election has caused public faith in the fairness of elections to decline. According to Pew, 40% of Trump voters believed he definitely won the 2020 presidential election. It is also the case that the Electoral College does not always produce a result that reflects popular will. In some cases, the Electoral College can deliver a misfire, where the presidency is not won by the candidate who wins the popular vote. This has happened 4 times: in 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016. Is popular sovereignty still relevant today? It would be hard to argue that this principle is no longer relevant in modern times. Tyranny remains a threat to fundamental rights and freedoms and is prevalent in undemocratic forms of government around the world. While some may want changes to the structure and design of American government, there is almost universal support for democratic ideals. A second principle of the Constitution is limited government. The Founding Fathers believed that citizens are best able to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As outlined by the Declaration of Independence, if government powers are confined only to essential functions, such essential functions might include foreign and defense policy. In modern times, the term big government has been used to refer to a government that unnecessarily intrudes or intervenes in the daily lives of its citizens. There is also a strong belief in the United States that citizens are best able to achieve the American dream through personal responsibility and hard work rather than government intervention. Limited government is codified in the Constitution in the 10th Amendment. This says that any powers not given to the federal government in the Constitution are reserved by states or the people. To quote the Constitution, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." Does limited government work in practice? It is true that American government intervenes much less in the daily lives of its citizens compared to welfare states in Western Europe. For example, there are no federal unemployment benefits and no universal public health care like the NHS. It is also the case that there was much greater opposition to government lockdown rules in the United States during the COVID epidemic compared to in Western Europe. However, the size of federal government power far exceeds that envisaged by the Founding Fathers and expanded significantly during the 20th century at the expense of states' power. For example, federal employees have increased from 1 million in 1939 to 3 million in 2024. Is limited government still relevant today? It could be argued that the danger of big government unnecessarily intruding or intervening in the daily lives of its citizens remains today. Most Americans believe in personal responsibility and that life outcomes are best determined by hard work rather than government intervention, the American dream. For example, according to Pew, 73% of Americans say it is very important to work hard to get ahead in life. This compares to 60% of citizens in the United Kingdom. However, government can play an important role in addressing important social problems, such as poverty, inequality, and workers' rights. Strictly limited government means that the federal government cannot fully address these national issues. For example, according to the US Census, 8% of Americans have no health insurance, while the UK's NHS provides universal health care. The third principle of the Constitution is federalism. The original 13 colonies had been governed separately with their own systems of local government. Each state had its own jurisdiction and sovereign integrity. The Founding Fathers wanted to create a strong national government, but they also wanted to preserve the existing system of local government, recognize local diversity, and ensure decisions were made at the appropriate level. The Founding Fathers therefore established a federal form of government. In a federal form of government, political power is divided between national and state governments, with each having their own jurisdiction and sovereign integrity. Again, federalism is enshrined in the 10th Amendment, which says that powers not given to the federal government in the Constitution remain held by states or the people. Is federalism still relevant today? Many would argue that government can better stay in touch with the people if decisions are made at an appropriate level. This minimizes the imposition of blanket, federal measures that do not suit local conditions. Federalism also ensures recognition for local political, cultural, and social distinctiveness. Federalism allows a range of political subcultures to exist side by side. It permits, for example, a range of approaches on the legal status of marijuana, with 38 states permitting its use to some degree. Federalism continues to provide an excellent compromise between strong national government and local diversity. However, federalism prevents the establishment of shared national standards across the whole country. For example, the age of consent is decided at the state level and ranges from 16 to 18. It could be argued that this is a standard that should exist nationally. It is also the case that significant national issues can be left unresolved as the federal government does not have the power to impose national solutions. For example, only 41 states are members of the Common Core Standards, a federal attempt to improve national school performance. The fourth principle of the Constitution is separation of powers and checks and balances. Separation of powers and checks and balances were two principles developed by the Founding Fathers to prevent tyranny and demagoguery. Separation of powers is the division of governmental power amongst the three branches of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Each branch is independent and does not have enough power to dominate over another. Because of this, branches of government must share power to govern effectively. There are two types of separation of power. Separation of function is where each branch of government has its own distinct role within government. Separation of personnel is where there is separation between those who hold power in each branch of government. No one person can hold power in more than one branch of government. For example, President Obama had to resign as Senator of Illinois to become president in 2009. It was also the case that President Taft could not serve as both President and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the same time, the only individual to have done so. Checks and balances provide an additional means of preventing tyranny and demagoguery. Checks and balances mean that each branch of government hold powers that permit them to limit or check the power of the other branches. For example, Congress has the power to enact new law. However, the President can veto proposed law, which Congress can override with a 2/3 majority. The Supreme Court can also strike down any law that is unconstitutional. Are separation of powers and checks and balances still relevant today? Both these principles of the Constitution continue to promote pluralism and compromise and help prevent tyranny and demagoguery. However, separation of powers and checks and balances can create gridlock, making decision-making slow and unresponsive. For example, in 2018, the government shut down for 35 days because the President and Congress could not agree on the federal budget. This means that radical change is very difficult to achieve, with decisions favoring the status quo. In this lesson, we have examined the key principles of the United States Constitution: popular sovereignty, limited government, federalism, and the separation of powers and checks and balances. We have also started to consider how they work in practice, and if they are still relevant in modern times. Future lessons will return to these themes.